Jake had one thing he loved more than anything else about his home in the quiet suburban neighborhood: his hot tub. Every evening after work, he'd slip in, let the warm jets melt the stress away, and just enjoy the peace he'd fought hard for. It was his little oasis, his reward. But peace, as Jake was learning, wasn't something Karen Matthews believed in. Karen was the kind of HOA president who took her job way too seriously. She had a knack for turning the tiniest issues into neighborhood-wide crises. If a flower was out of place or a trash can left 5 minutes too long by the curb, Karen was there with her clipboard, ready to enforce the rules with a zeal usually reserved for government agents. That summer day, Jake had just stepped out to check the mail when he saw Karen crouched by his hot tub, dipping her hand in the water like she owned the place. At first, Jake thought he was imagining things. Maybe Karen was watering a plant or checking the sprinkler system. But then, she climbed right in, fully dressed, with a smug grin, like this was perfectly normal. "Karen, what the heck are you doing in my hot tub?" Jake asked, raising his voice. Karen looked up, splashing water as if she didn't hear him. "Relax, Jake. It's a community neighborhood. I have every right to enjoy what belongs to all of us," she said, sitting back like she was queen of the spa. Jake blinked. "You're right. This is my backyard, my property. Your hot tub, no. Just no." Karen crossed her arms. "You're too uptight. We all pay HOA fees. That makes it community property. You can't just hog the good stuff." Jake laughed, partly in disbelief. Paying HOA fees doesn't mean you get to jump in other people's hot tubs whenever you feel like it. Karen's expression hardened, clearly thinking she was above any petty homeowner rules. "I'm just trying to be neighborly. Maybe you should loosen up a bit." Jake could feel the familiar surge of irritation. This wasn't about neighborliness. It was about control. Karen loved power and drama, and today, Jake was her target. The confrontation was just the beginning. Little did Karen know, Jake had a plan that would teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. A lesson involving a harmless but colorful surprise that would soon turn her smugness into panic. As the sun set, Jake started making calls and ordering something special online. The peaceful evenings in his backyard were about to get a lot more interesting. If you thought Karen getting into Jake's hot tub was the end of the story, think again. The next time Karen dipped a toe in, she wouldn't just get wet, she'd get purple. The next morning, Jake sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, a strong cup of coffee in hand, determined to make sense of the mess Karen had stirred up. He'd never been one to get caught up in HOA drama. But when someone waltzed into his private hot tub like it was a community swimming pool, it was personal. He typed in the HOA bylaws, scrolling through pages of dry, legal jargon. There was plenty about lawn maintenance, noise restrictions, and even rules about paint colors on houses. But nothing about community use of private amenities. No mention that Karen, or anyone else for that matter, had the right to just jump into his hot tub. Jake's frustration grew. If Karen wanted a public pool, maybe she should have pushed for one at the clubhouse, not sneak into his backyard like some entitled queen. But instead of calling the whole office to complain, Jake had a better idea. A way to handle Karen on his own terms, without legal battles or nasty emails. That afternoon, Jake stopped by the local pool supply store. He browsed the aisles until he found exactly what he was looking for: a bottle of purple pool dye. It wasn't the kind that permanently stains or ruins water. It was a harmless, temporary dye designed for pool leak detection and staining the water bright purple for a few days before fading. The kind of thing that would make anyone look like they'd fallen into a grape juice vat. Jake smiled to himself. This was going to be perfect. He took the bottle home, carefully reading the instructions. The dye would turn the water purple in minutes, but was safe for skin and surfaces. His plan wasn't to harm Karen, only to send a colorful message. That evening, Jake got to work. He waited until the neighborhood was quiet, then sneaked into his backyard and poured the purple dye into the hot tub's water circulation system. The water quickly shifted from clear blue to a vibrant, deep purple. Satisfied, Jake smiled, knowing Karen's next attempt at using the tub would be unforgettable. Meanwhile, Karen was busy making plans of her own. At the next HOA meeting, she was already rehearsing how she'd use her community privilege to push for shared access to private amenities. Her tone was confident. She'd dealt with pushback before and always won. Back at Jake's house, he settled into his usual spot on the porch, watching the street and wondering if Karen would be bold enough to try the tub again soon. The suspense hung heavy like the summer heat. A few days later, Jake's moment came. Around midnight, he spotted a figure sneaking through the hedges toward his backyard. It was Karen, dressed in her usual oversized sun hat and a swimsuit that looked way too fancy for a stealth mission. She climbed over the fence with surprising agility for someone who usually acted so prim and proper. Jake held his breath. Karen slipped into the hot tub, humming softly as the purple water surrounded her. She didn't realize the dye had already taken effect. The next morning, Jake's phone buzzed nonstop. Texts, calls, even a few worried messages from neighbors. Apparently, Karen had shown up at the community center bright and early with purple-stained hands and feet, desperately scrubbing and yelling at anyone who'd listen about some mystery. Contamination in the neighborhood. The gossip spread like wildfire. People were whispering about the purple lady in the HOA group chat, and memes started popping up of Karen covered head to toe in bright purple splotches. Jake couldn't help but chuckle. His little prank had hit its mark. But Karen wasn't going to take this lying down. Her pride was bruised, and she was already plotting her counterattack. Jake knew this wasn't the end. It was just getting started. And if you think a purple dye prank is where the story ends, you're in for a surprise. Karen's next move will shock the entire neighborhood and turn the HOA upside down. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to a sight no one could ignore. Karen Matthews was the talk of the block, and not for any good reason. She showed up at the HOA clubhouse meeting looking like she'd wrestled a carton of grape juice and lost. Her hands, feet, and even her face were blotched with bright purple stains that just wouldn't budge. At first, people whispered quietly, trying to stifle laughs. But Karen's frantic scrubbing and desperate explanations quickly stole the show. "I don't know how this happened," Karen declared, waving her purple-streaked hands. "Someone must have sabotaged the water. This is an outrage, a health hazard." She glared around the room, clearly expecting sympathy, or at least a group of angry neighbors to rally behind her. Jake, sitting near the back with a knowing smirk, resisted the urge to laugh out loud. He had to admit, watching Karen's meltdown was almost worth the trouble she'd caused him. But Karen wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and started calling anyone she could think of. The HOA board members, the pool supply store, even the city health department. She was determined to pin the purple mess on Jake, accusing him of harassment and illegal activity. The HOA board meeting quickly turned chaotic. Half the neighbors were giggling behind their hands, the other half trying to keep a straight face while Karen ranted about personal property rights and community standards. Jake finally stood up, clearing his throat. "Let's get one thing clear," he said calmly but firmly. "That purple dye came from a pool product. It's harmless. And more importantly, it was in my hot tub, on my property." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You admit it. You put dye in the water. That's vandalism." Harassment. You're going to pay for this. Jake shook his head. I didn't do anything illegal. I'm not the one sneaking into someone else's backyard and using their hot tub without permission. The room hummed with murmurs. Some nodded in agreement, others still looked unsure. Karen wasn't done digging her hole. I'm filing fines against you, Jake. Thousands of dollars in penalties. For disturbing community peace and defying HOA rules, she snapped. Jake raised an eyebrow. Which rules exactly? Because I looked through them all. There's nothing about you having the right to invade private property or use someone else's stuff. The tension was thick. But then Marcy, an older woman who usually kept to herself, cleared her throat. If I may, she said, stepping forward with quiet confidence. I think it's time someone reminded Karen what community really means and what it doesn't. Karen's eyes flicked to Marcy, irritation flashing across her face. Marcy smiled. Karen, maybe you should have asked before diving into someone's hot tub. And maybe it's time you respected the neighborhood's privacy, instead of acting like you own it. There was a ripple of applause, and a few neighbors nodded in support. Karen's face turned redder than the purple stains. But the drama wasn't over. Karen's reaction shocked everyone. She didn't back down or apologize. Instead, she doubled down, accusing Marcy and Jake of conspiring against her. The HOA meeting dissolved into shouting matches, accusations, and threats. Some neighbors were embarrassed, others were entertained. But one thing was clear. The neighborhood was divided, and Karen had just lit the fuse. Outside the meeting, Jake ran into Marcy. You really threw down in there, he said, impressed. Marcy shrugged, still smiling. Someone had to. Karen's been pushing everyone around for years. Maybe now she'll think twice. Jake couldn't help but feel grateful for Marcy's unexpected support. He was starting to realize this might turn into a bigger fight than just a silly purple dye prank. Meanwhile, Karen was already on her phone, typing furious messages to the whole lawyer and plotting her next move. Jake knew things were about to get a lot more complicated. Karen wasn't the kind of person to back off quietly, especially when her pride was on the line. But Jake also had a feeling the purple dye was just the beginning of a very colorful saga. And if you think the drama's heating up now, wait until you see what Karen tries next, including threats, fines, and even a full-blown HOA power struggle. The tension in the neighborhood had shifted from awkward whispers to a full-on storm. Karen Matthews wasn't just embarrassed about the purple dye incident. She was furious. And when Karen got furious, she got dangerous. Just days after the explosive HOA meeting, Jake started receiving ominous letters slipped under his door. Formal notices from the HOA claiming he was harassing the HOA president and violating community standards. The penalties, thousands of dollars in fines. Fines he had no intention of paying. Jake knew Karen wasn't going to let this slide. She was using every ounce of her HOA power to make his life miserable, hoping to force him to back down. But Jake was no pushover. One morning, Jake found a cease and desist letter taped to his front door, a legal-sounding document, accusing him of interfering with HOA operations and creating a hostile environment. It was clear Karen was trying to intimidate him, but Jake had allies. And he wasn't about to be bullied out of his own backyard. He called Marcy, the quiet HOA member who had unexpectedly become his champion. Marcy, Karen's really pushing. Hard now, Jake said. She's fining me, threatening legal action. And I don't know how far she'll go. Marcy sighed, her usual calm tone edged with frustration. That's Karen for you. She's always done whatever she wants, and when people push back, she flips the script. But I've been watching her for years, Jake. You're not the first to stand up to her. Together, Jake and Marcy started gathering evidence. They talked to neighbors who had quietly suffered under Karen's reign. Stories of fines for trivial things, petty inspections, and threats that made people afraid to speak up. With each new story, the case against Karen grew stronger. Meanwhile, Karen ramped up her campaign. She organized surprise inspections, sent passive-aggressive emails, and even tried to restrict access to community facilities for those she deemed problematic. Jake watched as the neighborhood grew more divided. But then came the real shocker. One afternoon, Jake overheard Karen at the clubhouse boasting to another HOA member, "I've already filed the paperwork to escalate Jake's fines. He won't know what hit him. I'm taking back control of this community, one roll at a time." Jake's blood boiled. This wasn't just about a hot tub anymore. It was a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. Determined to fight back, Jake decided to take his evidence to the next HOA meeting. He and Marcy planned a presentation exposing Karen's abuses, hoping to rally the community. But Karen caught wind of their plan. Before the meeting, she sent out a neighborhood-wide email warning everyone that Jake was spreading false information and trying to undermine the HOA board. The meeting day arrived, electric with anticipation. Neighbors packed the community hall, whispers buzzing like electricity. Some looked nervous, others eager. Jake took a deep breath as he stepped to the front with Marcy beside him. He started with the purple dye story, easing everyone in with a little humor. Then, he laid out the documented abuses, the unjust fines, the secret inspections, the threats. Marcy shared her own experiences, her voice steady and clear. "This isn't about breaking rules. It's about respect. Karen's been ruling this community with an iron fist, and it's time for that to end." Some neighbors nodded, others whispered agreements. Karen sat stiffly at the board table, her usual confident smile replaced with a scowl. When it was her turn to speak, she tried to dismiss the accusations. "These are baseless claims," she insisted. "I'm protecting this community. Anyone who disagrees is simply trying to cause trouble." But her words fell flat against the growing wave of dissent. After hours of debate, it was clear the neighborhood was turning against Karen. Jake felt a glimmer of hope, but he also knew Karen wasn't finished. She was stubborn, and she had power. Outside the meeting, Karen cornered Jake. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You're going to regret crossing me." Jake met her glare without flinching. "If standing up for my property and my neighbors is crossing you, then so be it." As Karen stalked off, Jake felt a surge of determination. This battle was far from over, but the tide was turning. And if you think the drama is intense now, wait until you see who steps up next. Someone unexpected, and the secrets that come to light. After the showdown at the HOA meeting, Jake felt a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. He had shaken things up, but Karen wasn't one to back down easily. The power struggle was far from over. That's when Marcy stepped forward in a way no one expected. Marcy had always been the quiet type, the woman who kept to herself, never raising her voice at HOA meetings. But behind her calm demeanor was a sharp mind and a long memory. She had been quietly observing Karen's behavior for years, and she wasn't about to let the neighborhood suffer any longer. One afternoon, Jake got a text from Marcy. "Got something you need to see. Meet me after the neighborhood watch meeting." Curious and a little suspicious, Jake agreed. Later that evening, they sat together at Marcy's kitchen table. She pulled out a folder filled with papers, emails, photos, evidence she had been quietly collecting. "This," Marcy said, sliding a thick packet across the table, "is a record of everything Karen's been doing behind the scenes. Secret fines, rule changes without notice, personal use of community resources, you name it." Jake flipped through the documents, eyes widening. There were emails Karen had sent to certain HOA members threatening fines for trivial reasons. Invoices showing Karen's personal events at the clubhouse that were never reported. And even photos of her using community facilities in ways that violated HOA rules. "Why didn't you bring this up earlier?" Jake asked. Marcy shrugged. "I wasn't sure anyone would listen. Karen's got a way of intimidating people, and most just gave up. But after the purple dye incident, I figured it was time to stop pretending." Jake felt a surge of hope. With Marcy's evidence, they had real ammunition. The next day, they started quietly talking to neighbors, sharing what they had found. Slowly, people began to open up about their own experiences with Karen's overbearing role. One by one, stories poured in. Fines for kids' lemonade stands, threats over holiday decorations, unfair inspections that targeted specific homeowners. Jake and Marcy were building a case, but they also knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. Meanwhile, Karen was growing more paranoid. She noticed the neighborhood's shift in attitude, the hushed conversations behind her back. One afternoon, Jake spotted Karen watching him from across the street, her eyes sharp and calculating. "She knows we're onto her," Jake said to Marcy during their neighborhood watch meeting. Marcy nodded. "She's scared. That means we're doing something right." But Karen wasn't just scared, she was scheming. The very next HOA newsletter was filled with passive-aggressive warnings about respecting community leadership and consequences for disruptive behavior. It was clear Karen was trying to intimidate anyone who dared challenge her. Jake felt the pressure, but also the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about his hot tub anymore. It was about standing up for everyone in the neighborhood who had felt powerless. One evening, as Jake was mowing his lawn, Marcy walked over, her expression serious but determined. "We need to present this to the entire HOA board soon," she said. "If we can get enough support, we might finally take back control." Jake agreed, feeling a newfound strength. Together, they weren't just fighting one person, they were fighting a system that had allowed Karen's reign for too long. But just as they were preparing their next move, something unexpected happened. A rumor started spreading around the neighborhood, something that could change everything. Word was that Karen herself had been secretly using the community clubhouse's amenities for her own private spa days for years without paying or telling anyone. If true, it was the ultimate hypocrisy and the perfect way to flip the script. Jake and Marcy exchanged glances. This was the kind of bombshell that could end Karen's control once and for all. But how to prove it? As whispers grew louder, Jake realized the battle was about to get even more intense and the stakes much higher. If you think this neighborhood drama has been wild so far, wait until the secrets come out and Karen's empire starts to crumble. The buzz around the neighborhood was unmistakable. The whispered rumors about Karen's secret clubhouse spa days had morphed into a full-on conversation. People were talking, and more importantly, they were listening. Jake and Marcy knew this was their moment. The HOA called a special meeting, and the community hall was packed beyond capacity. Chairs lined the walls, and neighbors stood wherever they could find space. The atmosphere was electric, equal parts anticipation, nervous energy, and a hunger for justice. Karen sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid and eyes sharp. She knew what was coming, and her usual confident smirk was nowhere to be found. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're here because our community deserves better. For years, we've watched Karen Matthews use her position to bully, fine, and intimidate neighbors, and all the while, she's been breaking the rules herself." A few gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcy followed, holding up a stack of photos and documents. We have proof Karen's been using the clubhouse as her private spa without paying or informing the HOA. She's been enjoying the community's resources at our expense. She passed the documents around, and neighbors leaned in, whispering and exchanging looks of disbelief. One older man stood up. I have lived here 15 years and never knew this. It's shameful. Another woman nodded. And the fines she's levied against us for minor things while she gets a free pass? Karen's face flushed red. She tried to interrupt, but the room had turned against her. The community wasn't ready to listen to excuses anymore. Jake felt the weight of the moment. Years of tension, silent complaints, and frustration had boiled over into this. I want us to move forward, Jake said. But for that to happen, we need fair leadership. One that respects our homes, our rights, and our community spirit. Voices began to rise in agreement. People shared their own stories of unfair treatment, long-held grudges finally spoken. Aloud, the mood shifted from tense to hopeful. Karen tried one last time to regain control. This is a witch hunt. You're all being manipulated by misinformation. But the crowd was no longer on her side. One by one, neighbors voiced their support for change, demanding Karen's resignation and a new election. The HOA board members exchanged uneasy glances. The pressure was mounting. Marcy stepped up again. This isn't about personal vendettas. It's about accountability. We need leaders who serve the community, not themselves. In the back, Jake caught sight of a few familiar faces, nodding people who'd been silent but were now ready to stand up. Finally, the HOA president's seat was vacant. Karen announced she would step down, citing personal reasons. The room erupted in a mix of relief and applause. As the meeting wrapped up, neighbors chatted excitedly about a fresh start. Jake and Marcy exchanged satisfied looks, knowing their hard work had paid off. But even as the community celebrated, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't quite finished. Karen might be out of the spotlight, but the ripple effects of her Rain and the purple dye prank would linger. And there was one last twist coming, one that no one expected. Just when it seemed the neighborhood had turned the page, a bombshell dropped that no one saw coming. Jake was at home, trying to relax after the intense HOA meeting, when his phone buzzed with a frantic message from Marcy. You need to see this. Now, curious and concerned, Jake rushed over to Marcy's house. She was sitting at her computer, eyes wide and a little shaken. On the screen were photos, candid shots of Karen, not in her usual power player mode, but clearly enjoying a lavish private spa day at the community clubhouse. Purple towels, scented candles, champagne glasses, and best of all, a stack of invoices showing no payment had ever been made for these events. Marcy clicked through more files. Emails between Karen and the clubhouse manager arranging these personal spa days without any HOA approval. Jake's jaw dropped. How did you even get these? He asked. Marcy shrugged. Let's just say some people want to see the truth come out. This was the ultimate hypocrisy. Karen, who'd been fining neighbors for minor infractions and lecturing everyone about rules, was secretly using community resources for her own luxury without a single cent of reimbursement. Word got out fast. The next neighborhood gathering was charged with an energy even stronger than before. People were furious, and they had the proof. Karen showed up, trying to put on her usual confident front, but the room greeted her with silence and sharp glares. Jake stood up, voice steady, but loud enough for all to hear. Karen Matthews told us to follow the rules, yet she broke them all, using the clubhouse as her personal spa without permission or payment. That's not leadership. That's exploitation. Neighbors murmured, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Karen's face paled. One brave neighbor spoke up. If she's been getting away with this for years, what else has she been hiding? The question hung heavy in the air. Karen tried to defend herself, but the damage was done. She announced her immediate resignation from the HOA board, mumbling something about personal matters and promising to make restitution. As she left, Jake felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. Justice had been served, but not without a fight. Later, as Jake soaked in his hot tub, now crystal clear and dye-free, he couldn't help but chuckle. The purple dye prank had sparked a chain reaction that toppled an empire. The neighborhood was healing, with new leadership promising fairness and respect. But for Jake, the best part was knowing that sometimes a little color goes a long way. The neighborhood felt different after Karen's resignation. The air was lighter, conversations friendlier, and the tension that had gripped the community for so long had finally begun to dissolve. Jake, sitting in his now peaceful backyard, often found himself reflecting on how a simple purple dye prank had set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. At first, it was just about one entitled HOA president dipping her toes where she didn't belong. But what followed was a roller coaster of drama, secrets, and a community standing up for itself. Jake's hot tub was back to its usual clear, warm self, free from unexpected purple surprises. But the legend of the purple dye prank lived on. Neighbors would occasionally stop by, laughing as they recounted the infamous Purple Lady incident, shaking their heads at Karen's stubbornness and the wild riot it had caused. Marcy became a neighborhood hero, the quiet woman who'd gathered the evidence, rallied the community, and helped bring about real change. Together, she and Jake helped elect a new HOA board that promised transparency, fairness, and respect for all homeowners. Of course, not everything changed overnight. Some neighbors still joked about Karen's purple-stained feet, and Jake sometimes found small purple decals mysteriously left on his doorstep, friendly reminders from grateful neighbors. One afternoon, Jake's daughter showed him a new neighborhood newsletter with a cartoon of a purple bathtub and the words, "Remember, community means respect." Jake smiled. It was a funny, fitting legacy. As for Karen, she moved away shortly after the scandal broke. No one really knew where, but a few whispered she tried to join another HOA only to be turned down quickly. The lesson was clear. No one gets to bully a neighborhood forever. For Jake, the biggest reward was peace and the knowledge that standing up for yourself, even with a little creativity and humor, can change the game. And that purple dye, it wasn't just a prank. It was a symbol. A splash of justice in a sea of control. If you enjoyed this wild HOA tale, hit that like button, subscribe for more unbelievable homeowner stories, and share it with friends who love a good underdog. Victory. Thanks for sticking with us through every twist and turn. Remember, sometimes the smallest actions make the biggest waves. Until next time, keep standing up. Keep fighting, and keep your hot tubs purple-free unless you're ready to make a statement.